So in an absolutely shocking act of humanity and transparency, and something frankly I can't ever recall seeing in my lifetime, on Wednesday, 17 December, in their response to the first of many lawsuits to be filed over the January 2025 DC midair crash, the United States government openly and humbly took the blame and admitted failures by the pilots of an Army Black Hawk helicopter and a controller in the Reagan National Airport tower during the January 29 midair collision over the Potomac River that killed 67 people. And not only did the U.S. government admit the responsibility in the crash, but they completely threw the American Airlines pilots under the bus too, which must come as a shock to American Airlines, because they have refused to accept any blame thus far and have hired their own team of lawyers to fight that argument. So I'll go over some of the U.S. government's admissions and court documents in a minute, but first, we need some context as to how exactly all this came about so quickly. Okay, so the U.S. government's admission of fault on December 17 marks a major turning point in the legal fallout from the January 29, 2025 midair collision between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and American Eagle Flight 5342. This all stems from an initial federal lawsuit that was filed in September 2025 by the family of victim Casey Crafton, seeking $250 million in damages. And as you might imagine, that lawsuit alleges and charges that the FAA, the U.S. Army, American Airlines, and PSA Airlines all acted with gross negligence. In the suit, it's alleged that the parties ignored over 85 near-miss events at Ronald Reagan Airport in the preceding 3 years. It also accused the airlines of packing flight schedules to dangerous levels and the government of failing to fix hazardous air traffic patterns, among other charges. And I also imagine some of you might be wondering why the U.S. is jumping the gun, so to speak, and admitting to all of this years before the case even sees the inside of a courtroom. Well, that's a great question, and the same question I had, and also at least a year before the NTSB even has a chance to come to a conclusion as to who exactly was or wasn't at fault. Well, while the NTSB investigation is still ongoing, and a final report is not expected until 2026, the government chose to admit liability now for several strategic and factual reasons. Number one, indisputable evidence. You may recall the NTSB held their preliminary hearings early in 2025, where they had already assessed much of the blame and causation. At those hearings, just some of the findings of the NTSB publicly placed responsibility on were the FAA's air traffic controllers, the U.S. Army helicopter pilots, and the documented history of dozens of near misses at the DCA airport in just a short period of time. And that's just to name a few of their conclusions. So already before any day in court, there is enough evidence out there to prove the U.S. government was more than liable for many facts of the crash. But still, it seemed like an odd legal strategy, right? Especially for the United States government. But like I said, this is a rare occasion where the administration said it wants to be transparent, and well, this is about as transparent as you can get. So by admitting that it breached its duty of care, the government can shift the focus from whether it is liable, because it is admitting that it's liable. But now all that's basically left to decide will be how much it should pay in damages, potentially avoiding a lengthy and damaging trial. And also, like I said, the government wants to be transparent, and that means public accountability. Already facing immense pressure from victims' families and Congress, the Department of Justice opted for transparency regarding known failures, such as the helicopter's faulty altimeter, lack of night vision goggles, and the ATC controllers, just to name a few. Okay, so let's go over some of the government's admissions they filed in court this week. I was going to read from the filing, but since the document is 209 pages long, I figured even your break at the office on the porcelain YouTube watching throne isn't that long, so I'll nutshell it for you, but I will include a link to this entire document so you can read it at your leisure. But the government admitted fault primarily due to specific operational failures by the FAA and the U.S. Army. First, the failure of the Army pilots. The Department of Justice acknowledged that the Black Hawk pilots failed to maintain proper vigilance to see and avoid other aircraft, which was a direct cause of the accident. Air traffic control violations. The government admitted that an FAA air traffic controller violated official visual separation procedures at night. Specifically, the controller alerted the helicopter to the nearby plane, but failed to notify the passenger jet of the helicopter's presence. Prior warning signs. The government admitted it was on notice of at least 85 near-miss events between Army helicopters and civilian traffic in that specific DC airspace in the 3 years preceding the crash. And technical issues. Primary findings also highlighted that the helicopter's altimeter was faulty, reading 80 to 100 feet lower than its actual altitude, contributing to the pilot's lack of situational awareness. And then there was this little nugget in the filing. Remember I said the U.S. threw American Airlines under the bus? Well, while admitting its own negligence, the government's filing suggests that American Airlines and PSA Airlines may also share responsibility for failing to mitigate known risks in the congested DC flight corridors. But the government's admission was not a blanket acceptance of total blame, because instead it used its filing to also apportion fault to American Airlines, or as the government put it, shared liability. The government argued its negligence was but one of several causes. It claims the American PSA pilots should have reacted sooner to traffic warnings, and that the airline's aggressive scheduling practices contributed to the disaster. However, as I said, American Airlines wasn't none too pleased about that little paragraph. American Airlines' response to this lawsuit was that American Airlines and PSA have filed motions to dismiss their portion of the lawsuit altogether, arguing that the crash was entirely the fault of the military and the FAA. So as they say, stay tuned to see how that part plays out. So let's take a quick look at the top of the U.S. government's reply to the lawsuit so you can get that legal flavor of the admission. You can see at the top here it was filed on December 17, 2025. And this is page 1 of 209. Like I told you, it was long. This is the case of Casey Crafton, deceased, versus American Airlines, PSA Airlines, and the United States of America. The United States of America answers plaintiff's master complaint as follows. General admission of liability. The United States admits that it owed a duty of care to plaintiffs, which it breached, thereby approximately causing the tragic accident on January 29, 2025. As specifically set forth below. The United States admits that it, among other tortfeasors, is liable to a plaintiff who is legally eligible to recover monetary damages as permitted by the federal tort claims in an amount yet to be determined and proportioned among other tortfeasors. Oh, and in case you're wondering what a tortfeasor is, it's legalese for when you do a bad thing. But like I said, if you have time, and you need something to read, I'll include a link to all 209 pages. Okay, so then what comes next? Well, the admission of fault dramatically accelerates the legal process, but next would come the damages phase. The case will now focus on determining the monetary compensation for the families of the 67 victims. Then you have the settlement negotiations. The government and airlines are likely to enter intense mediation to settle claims before they reach a jury trial. Well, that's depending on what happens with American Airlines. And then the apportionment or fault phase. A judge or jury must now decide exactly what percentage of blame lies with the government versus the airlines to determine who pays what. And finally, there's the NTSB's final report, which is expected in 2026 and will serve as the definitive record of the crash and will likely be used as evidence in the ongoing damages phases. So there you have it. Just a nutshell legal report from a nutshell YouTuber. So now I have a few questions for you. Are you like me? Are you surprised at the actual transparency and openness of the U.S. government on this crash? Do you agree with the U.S.? Did they go far enough or not far enough? And what about American Airlines? Should they share in the blame or are they victims too? I look forward to hearing from you. So as always, please be sure and let me know down below.